So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role of patronage in the development of your career in artistic practice.
Well, it's funny because I have to say I agree with Tom about the ambiguity of gallery spaces, and about 20 years ago I began to move away from gallery spaces because I was so uncomfortable with their ambiguity. And it's only once in a while, and I think Dara and Alberto, who are my art dealers, quote unquote, are very patient with me because once in a while I give them something that I have made for me, just because I'm interested in something I've read, Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse, something that, for Orlando, a character has really caught my imagination, and I have done a portfolio for me, not commissioned by any public institution. And so in the back there's a bunch of naked guys that I did 10 years ago because I was exploring the male gaze, which no one asked me to do. But most of my practice is public art. And for that I have totally depended on patronage. If we understand by patronage museums and universities and art schools, like the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, Bezalel Academy in Israel, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. And what I have appreciated most about that patronage is not so much the funding, believe it or not, but what I call the cultural patronage, which maybe connects with your book more directly, which is that I find that what I really need ultimately is a cultural patron who is a regional gatekeeper. And for that, it is someone who has a very profound, deep commitment, maybe you can say roots, in a particular place, and identifies that there is some quality in the work of an artist, regardless of whether they're commercially successful or not, but there's some quality in the work of that artist, some element that is important to the cultural development of a place, meaning a people and a landscape. And that's how I define place, people, and landscape. And so, to me, that's the kind of patronage on which all of my most important works, whether at the Contemporary Art Museum in Honolulu this past summer, or with John and Margot Warnock, who are connected to Adobe Software, without the College of Fine Arts at Utah and State University in Salt Lake City with $1 million just 2 years ago, and they called me in as the first artist to come to Barrymore, Utah, and do a very large, very ambitious public art piece that lasted 12 hours at the state capitol. The performance, the proposal was read by the state attorney general. I mean, to see whether it would not offend, Republican, Christian, and Mormon community, and so a lot of hoops to run, and it only happened because John and Margot Warnock are Utahns committed to connecting that community, that people, that place, that landscape to the rest of the world, and not letting it continue to be isolated.
I have to jump in because I think that what you are saying is such a really incredible example of why a gallery like this and other places are becoming central rather than marginal to our society. And that has to do with the fact that we are in the middle of a huge shift, obviously from industrial to post-industrial to knowledge-based to an innovation society, which is not even enough to say knowledge-based, quite frankly, the knowledge economy, but it's actually the question of an innovation economy and a realm of ideas. And so what you have, I think these people seem to do, and there are financial background which yet to support it. I didn't even know that, but whether it were, even if it wasn't, even if they were farmers, it wouldn't really matter, because we're not crude materialists, and I think that's important to understand. Is that if you're in Utah and you want Utah to be globally connected to have a decent standard of living, then you have to be open to new ideas and new influences and new colors, and then, when you see an artist who supports that, you want to bring that artist, even though it involves a lot of risk. And we're seeing that in Saudi Arabia right now, which is, it's not Utah, it's not Mormon land, but it is an exceedingly conservative society to a very reactionary degree, But the National Oil Company, which is globally connected, oil is part of the knowledge economy, and it's a strongly knowledge-based industry, is starting a cultural center that will have the first public cinema in the country, the first theater. It's very risky. They're spending over $1 billion. The place might be shut down on opening day, but it's a risk that has to be taken if the society is going to prosper. So I think that's what I mean. To me, it's not ambiguous. To me, it's because there are people who relate to the artist's ideas because they got to believe it.
The thing is, I think it is ambiguous. I'll keep arguing. Because the $1 billion they're spending comes from oil, right?
Yeah.
If anything is ambiguous, it's oil, right? You need it. We're using it right now, right? And it's a power base for a country where women can't drive. That's one of the big revolutionary thing right now. Women are getting in cars and driving. And the repression in Saudi Arabia is so enormous. So, but they're all tied together. The elites of Saudi Arabia are certainly behind this. The elites are the same people that are in charge of the money that is going to this place. And believe me, if you invite me to come to Saudi Arabia to give a talk about public art, I'll be there. But I'll be there always with a grain of salt and a recognition of the community.
Well, I think whether you want to call it ambiguity or whatever, I think there's no question that there are all kinds of contradictions as cultural change happens. For example, that the first exhibition pavilion at Venice this year was the first year that Saudi Arabia had a pavilion at Venice, and of course it was sponsored by Saudi Aramco, right? And they ran a competition among their artists for submissions. Then they selected the artist that they were going to show, and they ended up with one artist only. They decided because it was really a major work. It was a large piece of sculpture, which also included multimedia effects and film and what have you. Filled the entire environment of the gallery, and it was by 2 women from Mecca. And personally, I must say I didn't know until I got there who the artists were, and I was just astounded that these artists have produced very powerful work. But wow, who would have thought that, as you say, in a country where women are not allowed to drive, 2 women artists from Mecca were capable of conceiving and getting produced this really major work. So you're quite right. I mean, call it ambiguity, whatever, but there's no question. As cultural change is happening, you continually get lots of contradictions as new perceptions are thrown up and patrons and the public, respond in varying ways.
Cultural change is always good.
Right, it's not always good. And I mean, just to take that example, it's interesting because, it's one thing to have a couple of women artists from Mecca doing this project that was probably very exciting, right? In a space that's a gallery, right? And one of the things about a gallery is that it's a very safe space where everybody understands that you can do whatever you want. You know what I mean?
It's like a protected space.
It's a protected space that's purposefully contextless, and it's a space that it's a space in which it's paradoxical, and I would even call it ambiguous. Sorry, because it is a space where you're supposed to enact very specific, almost kind of crusty avant-garde tropes, right? About transgression that have become such a pattern that it's not entirely clear that they're meaningful all the time because of this space. I mean,
A really clear example of that is the politics of freedom of expression in Taiwan, being Taiwanese. So, Taiwan doesn't want to become part of mainland China. And one of the ways that they express their difference from mainland China is by giving their artists freedom of expression. But meanwhile, the politics of Taiwan, and we were talking about the KMT and the sort of repressive government that ran Taiwan for a long period of time, is using the artists' freedom to differentiate themselves from the evil communists. And I'm not, believe me, a supporter of the mainland Chinese government. But there's an ambiguity, even in freedom of expression sometimes. or the way that the artists were used by our country to take care of themselves from the communists in the 50s.
Right, so it almost kind of turns into it's complicated because you can almost turn this space in which artists are able to talk in this specific way, in this specific space. You can almost use it as a way to kind of further ends that the larger culture doesn't want. You know,
Or a scapegoat for some sin.
Exactly.
Ernesto?
No, I was going to say, cultural change is messy, and it takes a step forward, 2 steps back, and it comes. It doesn't come like pure water. It comes at a pace you wanted it and you don't want it. You know, it's again, even what it's not black or white in the sense that there's good cultural change in black culture. So white or black. And I have a number of Arab women students right now. I've had them for the last few years. They're suddenly coming into North American art schools. I have a number of them as graduate students doing very, very dangerous work for which they would be arrested if they did it in the streets of Kuwait or, and so on. But they're looking for safe spaces and galleries, which have a very different role perhaps there than they do here. I mean, I think that, we have seen the role of galleries here evolve, and galleries here are not what they were back in the 80s. And when they were showing things that no one else wanted to show, that now museums show on a regular basis. So in a way, these women artists are seeking safe spaces.